resilience planning. From Mayor Cognetti of Scranton about her efforts to form a stormwater authority, and Mayor Hart of Waterloo, Iowa, about his 30-year climate and resilience plan. All of our cities are meeting the challenge head on, and the Protect program will be key to their long-term success, which is why the United States Conference of Mayors fully supports this new and innovative program. Today, we're joined by DOT professionals and an incredible lineup of mayors to discuss both the Protect program and how cities are addressing resiliency. As always, we thank Bloomberg Philanthropies and the funders of HUB, the Balmer Group, Emerson Collective, the Ford Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, and please welcome Michelle Jolin, President of RFA, who will be today's MC.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Jolin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Results for America. And as Tom said, today we're going to talk about the best strategies for tackling climate change by improving the resilience of the surface transportation system. We're going to dive into the Protect NOFO and hear from cities on best practices to promote resilience. So first, it is my pleasure to introduce Gary Jensen, who's the director of the Office of Natural Environment at the Federal Highway Administration. Gary will talk about key provisions in the Protect NOFO. Gary, thank you so much for joining us, and the Zoom is yours.
I think we might still be waiting for a moment for Gary to join. So we wanted to give you all some new information while we're waiting for Gary on some of the things that the local infrastructure hub has lined up for you all following the great the meeting we all attended in Columbus. And so one of the new resources that we have added to the site is about helping you all to prepare for some of these programs by looking at some case studies. And so I'm just going to share my screen and show you all where we're posting these case studies. And so right now we have grant award case studies on our website under resources. We'll post this all in the chat. And if you go in here, we've been able to, thanks to all the cities who've supported us here, they've been giving us information about their winning applications. So we've been able to share here some information about Safe Streets and Roads for All, grant RAISE, Reconnecting Communities grants. So you can go in here and learn more about the types of projects that you might all be interested in. We also have on here a resource that we'll be sharing with everyone after 5 winning strategies for Protect grant applications. This is going to go over a lot of the information that we talk about today about how to approach this opportunity with the NOFO in mind and the timing of that closing in August. And so we're going to be here to support you throughout the next 2 months as you prepare your application. I think since we're still waiting for Gary to join us, I think he's having some technical difficulty. We can launch into our mayor's panel, and I think we're going to have to break in with Gary after he's able to get on.
Perfect. So we will then shift our plans here and welcome Dr. Janice Barnes, who's the founding partner of Climate Adaption Partners, to moderate our panel of mayors. Welcome, Janice.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. We are thrilled to hear from these incredible mayors and the work that they're doing in their respective communities. And I think as they speak about the work that they're doing in their communities, you'll hear some examples of how you might be able to also think about the integration of resilience more holistically in the work that you're doing, whether it's a comprehensive plan update or a specific resilience plan. And we'd like to start with a few questions for our mayors, and we would ask each mayor specifically to just remind us the community that you're representing. But we'd like to start with Mayor Larson, if that's okay. Mayor Larson,
right.
I understand you've made some focus on environmental resilience planning over the last several years, given all that's happening in Duluth, and Duluth certainly has gotten a reputation as the potential for a receiving community for many others that are dealing with climate challenges as well. When you think about what's happening in Duluth now, can you speak a bit more about stakeholder engagement in that planning, and really not just the idea of engagement, but who and how? With whom have you been engaging, and how have you been doing that? And then how have you been integrating what you've been finding?
Oh, I love it. Okay. Yes, thank you for the question. So I'm Emily Larson. I'm mayor of Duluth, Minnesota. We are really the most beautiful city on the planet. We're right on the corner of Lake Superior. We're about 2 hours north of the Twin Cities, and we are adjacent to the Iron Range that creates most of the iron ore used around the world. And we're really, really, truly beautiful city. We have also experienced tremendous weather impacts. And so to just briefly describe my community, we're 86,000 residents, like I said, 26 miles long. Every inch of that is on either a river estuary or Lake Superior. We have 42 creeks that run down a very steep hill. We're only about 4 miles deep, and we have 300 miles of trail that connect us across the city. It's a very green city, but we also, because we have so much water and we're on a hill, we have flooding issues. We have weather issues. We're on a Great Lake, and we actually have hurricane force winds and erosion and water damage. So yes, we are very proud of the climate work that we are doing. I've been mayor for 7 years, and this is one of the issues that has been most urgent for my community based on our values and the history of who we are, but also based on the absolute urgency to address resilience and integrate climate into every single thing that we do. So the two questions you asked, who do you work with and how do you engage with them? Those are two of the core questions I ask my staff about everything before we make any investment or any program or staff or whatever it is. You have to answer for me, who did you talk to? How did you engage them? Who have we left out? And how does this investment create more justice in this community? And while I apply all of those questions to everything that we do, they're particularly pertinent as it relates to climate and energy. So we have a coalition of about 12 different climate action groups or energy resilience groups. I created a sustainability coordinator position, a sustainability officer position. Just last year alone, she brought in $33 million into this community. We have a climate action plan, a community climate action plan, and we also have a specific city energy plan. And we're acting on all of this. And so I won't talk too long, but what I will say is, for me, we're not a big city. We don't have unlimited resources. Local government isn't sitting on money. But we have also found that leading with our values, whether it's including resilience into our transportation system, whether it is including resilience into our parks or our workforce development, it has been paramount to how we do our work as a community. It's what our residents are deeply proud of. It pays off in the end with the financial investment, but it does take some leadership and some courage to get it started. And Duluth is very robust in our activism, and we call on our partners often to keep that choir singing. When the last time I met with that group of climate action and energy action activists, what I told them is, keep going. I need you to be loud. I need you to keep pushing me. You know, I can't do everything you want right away or on the preferred timeline, but we know that about each other. And I can't do anything if you aren't creating the noise and the activity to have my back and this community's back. And so the strategy that I have taken is really just a very community organizing based strategy to my leadership. And as it relates to climate, that's been the right one for us.
Thank you so much, Mayor Larson. And just before we leave that topic, I'd be really interested to hear any thoughts you have about Duluth's designation as a receiving community and whether or not that informs any of the planning work that you're doing or not.
Yeah, it does. And especially as it relates to infrastructure planning and transportation or housing planning. So Duluth is now known as this climate refuge. And that has been new. That was really new to me when Harvard first kind of announced that and the New York Times started covering us. And I will say that we don't have really firm numbers on what that is yet. And it's absolutely happening. And it's not the fringy mobility that I expected it to be. When I first heard about climate refuge, I actually felt disappointed and kind of scared. Disappointed that we as a country are creating systems and environments that people have to leave where they've lived for generations because we're not protecting them. And I was scared that that could happen anywhere and everywhere. So Duluth has this abundance of fresh water and we're a beautiful city. And so people really love to live here. But I will tell you, I expected climate migration to be very high end people, either double income, no kids, or retired. And there is some of that. There is absolutely mobility of choice, and that does come with some resources. But it is also people who are sincerely looking for a place to raise their family that they don't have to leave. I mean, I am seeing it well beyond any of the expectations that I had. And I meet people weekly who have moved here for purposes of climate. So it is something that we struggle with. It's something we think about a lot as it relates to density, as it relates to connectivity, activation, mobility, and aging. So it actually factors very heavily now into our planning and into our economic development strategies. That was not the case before. We don't have it down to a science. We don't have all these documents that back that up, but it's absolutely very front of mind for us.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mayor Larson. Let's turn to Mayor Aftab. Mayor, I'm very interested in your perspective on the intersectionality of resilience and equity, and had the good fortune last week to hear a little bit more about the 2023 Green Cincinnati plan. To what extent do extreme weather events have disproportionate impacts on low-income communities or other vulnerable communities in your city? And what strategies are you considering to try to improve the equity in your responses? Sir, you're on mute.
Nailed it. Strong start. So as you can imagine, it has profound impacts on racial equity. And as a result, our team is really laser focused on that intersection between climate and equity issues. Look, the earth, and specifically our city of Cincinnati, is getting hotter. Historically, our city experiences about 30 days a year with a heat index over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 days. In the next couple of decades, it'll be 80 days. When we map temperature on the ground, this is getting to the equity piece, we see that there can be a 10 to 15 degree difference from one community to another. That hits particularly hard when we consider 18,000 homes in my city don't have air conditioning. And that's not unusual for a large American city. You know, when other useful facts to know about specifically our weather, while many parts of the world are experiencing droughts, Cincinnati is actually experiencing more storms. Annual precipitation in the Midwest has increased between 5 and 10% since 1950. We are seeing storms that we used to expect once in every 100 years. We're now seeing them virtually every single year. And Cincinnati, this may surprise you, but we're built on hills. We are a city known as Seven Hills. So our topography is such that means flash flooding and landslides on a really regular occurrence now that we're seeing these 100-year storms every single year. On top of that, we have one of the country's oldest sewer systems, which is a combined sewer system. This means during mega storms, we have thousands of homes that are vulnerable to sewer backups, where you have raw sewage in your basement. This has caused our city to spend more than $150 million in recent years working on this issue. Now, of course, stormwater backup affects all of Cincinnati, but it's particularly hardest hit in our disinvested communities. And at its core, climate change is an equity issue as a risk multiplier, right? Making existing problems even worse when considering poverty or homelessness, public health issues. some members of our community, oftentimes our poorest, are at higher risk for impacts of climate change. Bad air quality leads to higher asthma rates, degraded infrastructure leads to flooding and sewer backups and fewer trees. That means more pavement, which leads to more unhealthy temperatures. The nature of these risks and the way they present in our communities is a growing field of research shaping the way we design climate solutions to protect, frankly, our most vulnerable populations. And just to conclude, as was mentioned, we just adopted our 2023 Green Cincinnati plan. This is a process that we actually do every 3 years to update our climate goals, because technology and data around this field is changing rapidly. So this is something we've been doing since 2018 to have this actually even earlier than 2018 to have this plan very, very specifically, because as we learned from Bloomberg, you can't track it as a goal unless you can actually get into the data to look at it. So that's something that we're very, very committed to. This report, this Green Cincinnati plan, marks the first time our city has ever committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, and it sets forward an action plan to rise to the urgency of this moment. So that's a little bit of what we're doing in Cincinnati, but really eager to talk more about resiliency and this federal program.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And really, it was such a pleasure to hear Molly and the team talk about the equity framework that you've built in there and the purposefulness that you've taken to that conversation. I just encourage everyone to take a look at the link in the chat. And if you have questions for the mayor, drop those into the chat as well. Mayor Hobbs, may we turn to you next? The city of Hempstead is incorporating environmental resilience in a comp plan. I guess that's your 10-year update, or is that your first comp plan?
Yes, thank you for having me. Yeah, we're in Hempstead, which is on Long Island, and Hempstead has an antiquated sewer and water system. We actually have some of our stormwater pipes that's made out of clay. That's how old our system is. And I'm really grateful to say that it really started with the state partnering with Hempstead, because after Superstorm Sandy, with the flooding that we experienced, the state came up with funding called Rebuild with Living by the Bay. And it was so important that we address that, because although we're more inland on Long Island, we're surrounded by Hempstead State Lake. We have brooks, we have ponds. And so with our aging infrastructure, many times when there's a storm, we experience flooding. And so in the village of Hempstead, as we are in the process now of undertaking some economic development in our downtown area, although we are a very suburban community, but our downtown area, we have the Long Island Railroad, we have the Rosa Park bus station. And so we're the transit hub here on Long Island. And so it was my goal as mayor to make sure that we do a reassessment of not only our carbon footprint, but how we can build our transit area in a way that it's sustainable and reduce flooding. And so, and I want to say that anytime on the federal level, when we're able to get direct funding like with ARPA, it puts us in a better position to address some of these problems when it comes to our infrastructure, where we can have a step up and not have to wait for things to be funneled on the state level. And I think that's very important.
Yes, sir, I think that your message is so spot on. Sometimes it feels like resilience or climate adaptation planning has to be, let's start something from scratch. And what you're doing is so spot on, because you're looking at the way the energy is already moving through the system, so to speak, and saying, how do we layer this in and make this part and parcel of just the way we do our work? Could you talk a little bit more about the Downtown Hempstead Reimagined Plan? There's some incredible material that's available online for anyone who'd like to follow up and see what you've been doing. But is there anything further about particular long-term vision that you'd like to raise up so that we can motivate others to think about how to do these things together as opposed to running parallel but separate initiatives?
Sure. Again, I think that partnership is important. As I said, we have the Long Island Railroad station right in Hempstead. And as we are, we have, I believe, 4 projects that's already started, but we're partnering with the Long Island Railroad, who's right next to where the development is taking place. And we found out that the Long Island Railroad had an abandoned pedestrian tunnel. And so partnering with them, we realized that we can now use that tunnel to run new pipes for our rainwater runoff, where, again, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel, using what we had available to us. Making that partnership is very important. And then we found out that with the density that we have in Hempstead, as we are doing this development in our downtown area, we're going to redesign some of our main streets where we stop having vehicle traffic and make it more pedestrian friendly for bikes and walking. And I think that's so important because, again, in the long run, it saves on our making the impact on our environment, and also helps us to sustain our roadways by lessening that vehicle traffic and having more pedestrian friendly traffic.
That's something that we all need, particularly conversation we're trying to have in New York as well. Before we go to Gary, it would be great to get your advice from each of you. You have quite the audience here. The local infrastructure hub is such an incredible network. What one piece or 2 pieces of advice would you have for anyone else, any of the other mayors who are trying to think about how to address their own climate hazards, all hazards approach, for example, and the kinds of vulnerabilities that those introduce, particularly inequitable distribution of those vulnerabilities, and what can be done about it, including how to get it paid for. So if we just kind of go back around in the same order, could you share advice you have for others who are in the hub here today? Mayor Larson, may we start with you?
Yeah, I think what I am finding is that this whole field evolves so quickly. And in order to be ready for the opportunities that arise, whether it's this Protect Act, whether it's the transportation resiliency, whether it is, speaking to some of the, in fact, listening to the Cincinnati mayor got me thinking about, well, what is the temperature differences between different neighborhoods here too? Paying attention very quickly. It's just absolutely critical. And there is no, to me, the advice I would give other mayors and the advice I would give other communities is that the support is there to advance your neighborhood and your plans and your comp plan and your city very, very quickly. The urgency is there. While we as a country still don't seem totally unified on climate change, the residents of your communities are. And so my advice to you is to look very quickly at the many ways in which climate and resilience are going to be impacting your people, whether it is this summer, whether it is in 2 years, whether it is in climate migration. Prepare now, work hard, work well, use all of that infrastructure hub opportunity. It is amazing what is out there and what is in that infrastructure hub, and what is available to support cities. And we can't waste time anymore. Local action is urgent action, and it is the action that residents really believe and invest in, and they will co-produce the changes that your communities need to see.
I love that. Really taking advantage of community-based knowledge for community-driven change. Thank you so much, Mayor. Mayor Aftab, what is your advice?
It's hard to give advice with such a really broad issue of climate. So I think the way I was thinking about my advice would be, what would I want to know as a new mayor, or just a mayor trying to navigate this? And what we have been successful in Cincinnati at doing is using our Green Cincinnati plan as a mechanism to almost call to question to the community. What are the climate strategies that we all buy into? And that is the corporate community, that is obviously the activist and nonprofit community, and then just the larger community. Also, our tech ecosystem is really kind of tailored around climate issues. And so the Green Cincinnati plan was an impetus to get all of the various stakeholders on the same page about what is our climate strategy, both our economic strategy, taking advantage of this opportunity, but also our mitigation strategies. And being on the same page with all of those different stakeholders in our community make it much easier for us to compete more effectively for federal dollars, because all of those actors are lobbying the same federal decision makers consistently with a clear message and a clear priority list. And so that level of buy-in on the front end makes it much easier for us to act quickly when there's a NOFA that exists that is directly in line with one of our goals.
That's
And
excellent.
it also helps with the matching funds, because, you know, we've been very successful both in climate and also in infrastructure, getting these federal dollars. And so now we're struggling to get the matching funds. And so because it's a diverse coalition of folks together, we're able to leverage the private sector for matching funds when we run out.
That is such an excellent point. So many times we have conversations where the private sector, many times having huge landholds within the communities themselves, as well as vested interests that are quite significant, aren't at the table. So I really appreciate the message about engaging the private sector for a variety of different reasons. Thank you for that. Mayor Hobbs, what is your advice for the hub today?
Well, I would like to say, first of all, we know that there is a debate when it comes to addressing climate change. But I can tell you this, after a couple of weeks ago with the fires in Canada, even in New York, we experienced heavy smoke conditions where our residents had to, if they had to be outside, had to wear N95 masks. And so for anyone that doesn't think it's an issue that we have to address, Stevie Wonder can see that it's an issue that needs to be addressed. But I think that it's important to be able to have resources. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors is an example. I am grateful for all of the resources that we're able to get through this conference, and then the other mayors with best practices. I think it's just important to be able to know where the resources is, tap in the resources, and see what you can apply to your community.
Thank you. And the resource comment is really pertinent. I see that Jamie has added some tools for heat island effects to the chat. Thank you for that. Also, we have the heat.gov, the new website from NOAA, the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, NIAS. I'd encourage you to have a look at heat.gov as well. And for those of you who have not yet done a heat island mapping campaign in your cities, that call is on an annualized basis. And there's now quite a significant cohort with some excellent findings and next steps. And the good news about it, just like Mayor Hobbs was just saying, is that cohort is really willing to share. So no city has to start from scratch, but instead build on the efforts of those who came before. We do have a question from Eric. Eric, we're going to ask Gary to answer that question about the Protect grant, and if that's okay. And at this point, I think we can turn back to Michelle for a conversation and transition over to Gary. But before we do that, I want to thank you, Mayor Larson, Mayor Aftab, Mayor Hobbs. It is so important for all of us, including folks like me. I'm a practitioner focused on climate adaptation planning, but we need to hear the things that you are challenged with and really try to understand how we can support what you're trying to do within your community. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us here today and for the continued work to integrate climate resilience and equity into your investments in your city. Michelle?
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, mayors. And we are now going to turn it over to Gary. Gary had some technical difficulties, but we're thrilled to have him here. I will reintroduce him, Gary Jensen, Director of the Office of Natural Environment at the Federal Highway Administration. And Gary's here to talk about the key provisions in the Protect NOFO. And we already see questions coming in from folks, and so keep those coming. We're excited to have Gary here so he can help answer those, or we can help provide other information after the session to get them answered. So Gary, thank you for joining us, and the Zoom is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, everybody. I apologize for the delay. I did run into some difficulties. But I'm here today to talk about the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation Discretionary Grant Program. I will only say that once. From now on, I will say Protect. And as I start out today, I just put the most important thing you can know in the chat, and that is the address of where the notice of funding opportunity is. I'm going to give a couple disclaimers, but one of those disclaimers is that we are currently operating under an open solicitation, meaning I am kind of restricted about what I can say and what I can't say today in terms of the actual competition. We want to make sure we protect procurement and integrity and make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity to apply for these grants. Beyond that, the material I'm sharing today does not have the force of law or statute or regulation, and I'm just providing this as information, so it's not meant to depict any specific requirements or law under our policies. But what is the PROTECT program? It is a part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is intended to help a number of eligible applicants to plan for and strengthen surface transportation to be more resilient to natural hazards, including climate change, sea level rise, flooding, extreme weather events, and other natural disasters. I was very interested in some of the comments just provided by the other speakers, and especially the comments regarding wildfires and other things we might not have talked about a lot in the past when it comes to resilience. But our current NOFA was released on April 21st on grants.gov. Applications are due August 18th. And we have a great deal of amount of funding available. In this NOFA, we're offering our fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023 funding, which both comes from the bipartisan infrastructure law, but was also augmented by the appropriations bills in both those years for a total of $848 million. There are 4 different types of grants that we're offering, 4 different types of activities that we can be funded. One is resilience planning, which deals with resilience improvement plans, but also other resilience planning activities, capacity building, evacuation planning. The second category is resilience improvements. These are more construction type grants that are made to make infrastructure more resilient, such as drainage, elevating bridges, and even relocating roadways. We really want to fund projects, that incremental portion of projects that are going to make them more resilient. The third category is community resilience and evacuation routes. This is obviously directed to make evacuation routes more resilient and or add capacity or redundant evacuation routes to ensure the safety of citizens and communities. And finally, the fourth category is at-risk coastal infrastructure. This is to protect and strengthen coastal highway and non-rail infrastructure on those coastal areas. I'm going to talk about those areas in just a moment a little bit more. So what types of facilities are eligible? I've already seen some questions come in on this topic. Highway projects that would be otherwise eligible for assistance under Title 23 of United States Code. These are your federal aid highway projects that would typically be eligible under our other funding categories. Public transit projects that are typically eligible for transit funding are also eligible. Unique to this program in some ways are facilities and services related to intercity rail are also eligible. And finally, port facilities that connect ports with other modes or improve operations of those port facilities can also be eligible. So a broad range of eligibilities, but it is focused on transportation projects. So who's eligible to apply? Once again, we have a broad range of folks who are eligible. I'm going to start with 3 of the 4 categories: planning, resilience improvements, and the community resilience and evacuation grants eligibility. And then we'll talk about at-risk coastal infrastructure in a moment. But obviously, states or political subdivision of states, metropolitan planning organization, units of local governments, special purpose districts or public authorities with a transportation function, Indian tribes, federal land management agencies that apply jointly with states, or a multi-jurisdictional group of those entities. States do include the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, but not necessarily other territories. However, for at-risk coastal infrastructure, The eligibility is limited to those areas in those states that border the Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, Long Island Sound, or the Great Lakes. And this eligibility does include the other territories, including the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Once again, political states and political subdivisions of states are eligible, MPOs, local governments, special purpose districts, tribes, and once again, federal land management agencies. So the main difference between this grant opportunity and the other 4 categories is the eligibility of territories and the limitation on those coastal areas. How much non-federal share or cost sharing is required in this program? For planning grants, it was 100% federal share, so we will pay the entire amount of planning grants. For the 4 more construction type grants, the federal share is typically 80%. However, a little unusually is other federal funds can be used for the non-federal share. So if you have a different federal grant or formula funding from a different federal transportation program, that can be applied towards the non-federal share. In addition, Indian tribes under this program are also have specific eligibility for up to 100% federal share. What's the application process? As I mentioned, the most important thing you should know is where the NOFO is at on grants.gov. You do need to apply through grants.gov for this opportunity, and you must have a grants.gov account. That also requires you to have a sam.gov registration and a UEI, which can take several weeks. So please, if you're planning on or thinking about applying for this grant and you haven't already registered on grants.gov, start the process early. That way, if you have any technical difficulties, those can be resolved early on. We do have a number of resources that are available to assist. I already posted the link to the grants.gov NOFO, but right now I'm also going to post a link to our resources that we have specific on the federal highway page in the chat pod. And hopefully that can assist you with a lot of resources on climate and data resources, benefit cost analysis. But in particular, I want you to know that we have 2 more full-length webinars that we have recorded on our website. So they're much more thorough than I'm able to be today. So I'd encourage you to watch those recordings on our website if you were not able to attend those sessions. And I believe that's the prepared presentation that I had for the day, but I'd be open to taking some questions now.
Thank you. We've gotten a lot of questions coming on the chat. Eric, did you want to ask your question?
Sure. This is Eric Eisenberg from Lewis County, Washington. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So my question is about what types of federal highways are eligible under the program. It was my understanding that they had to be sort of larger federally funded highways. Does that mean that city streets are typically not included, or are they included if they allow you to access a federal collector or something that runs through your city?
We have received that question. I don't have a specific answer for you yet today. What I can say is if your route would be eligible for federal aid funding, like you said, if it's a a major collector above, then it would be eligible. We're still analyzing some questions on local streets. So unfortunately, all I can say is stay tuned. We will be answering that question on grants.gov when we post around our next round of Q&As, where we're answering the questions. So everybody has the opportunity to see the new information at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Carly, we have a question from Carly. Carly, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. I had a related question about whether or not pedestrian boardwalk infrastructure would be eligible, providing access to pedestrians to various assets. And then I also have a question about the benefit cost analysis and whether or not there are any restrictions to the benefit cost analysis approach integrating losses avoided to non-transportation related structures. So a lot of different resilience related projects would benefit both transportation infrastructure and then physical assets, buildings, residential, commercial, you know, is there any restriction to integrating those benefits? And then what if the benefit cost analysis values are predominantly direct physical damage avoidance to structures?
Okay, so a lot there. I will do the best I can. Once again, I apologize. I sort of need to be fairly generic today in my answers. And one thing I did not do is I did not provide our question, how to ask questions. So let me provide that right now too in the chat pod. That if you do have more specific questions than I'm able to answer today, please submit them to protectdiscretionary@dot.gov. But in terms of the bike and pedestrian, that's also part of questions that we've been receiving and we're trying to clarify. I can say up front, if your bicycle and pedestrian facility is part of an eligible facility, then it's definitely eligible, but we're working on a specific eligibility for other bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So please stand by to answer those questions. For the benefit cost analysis, I am not an economist or one of our experts. So I'll preface it with that. If you have not had the ability to watch the recording of our benefit cost analysis webinar, I would encourage you to do that and ask specific questions to our Protect Discretionary email address. But in general, I think more information is better when it comes to that benefit cost analysis. So if you have data that you feel is supportive of the benefit cost analysis, I would encourage you to include it for our consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Colette from Fresno, do you want to ask your question? Maybe we lost Colette. We have Penny from West Palm Beach.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a similar question to several that I've seen in the chat, and that is, if you are linking your project to a federal highway, is there a distance that is a maximum distance that you need to be within in order to allow that to be protected? That's part one. And then when you were going over the risk of the coastal infrastructure component, you mentioned the Atlantic, the Pacific. What about the intracoastal? My city, I'm from West Palm Beach, and we do have 8 or 9 miles on the intracoastal, but not directly on the Atlantic. Thank you.
Great. So in answer to your second question, I don't have that answer. I think that's a really good question though. And I will take that back to my folks, but if you want to submit it as well to the Protect Discretionary email address, that would be great as well. I think that's a really good question. In terms of the distance from a facility, the notice of funding opportunity does not spell out any minimum sort of distance. So I think in the application, we'd be looking for a reasonable explanation of how that project is going to protect or make the transportation facility more resilient. You know, there are a lot of examples that maybe it's a dune system, maybe it's you know, a debris flow area that may be protecting the facility, and it could be quite some distance off the roadway. So I think we'd be looking for the application to make that argument.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Lennis, do we have a question from you?
Hello, yes. I had a question as far as the definition of a highway. I wanted to know whether a city-owned road that is connecting to a highway would be an eligible facility.
So that's tied to that question we had earlier that we're still working on some specifics. I can say with some sort of certainty, if you look at the functional classification of that roadway and it's a collector or above, it's eligible. We're still working on an answer to the question for those local streets that would be a lower functional classification. So please stay tuned for that answer.
Thank you.
Great. So encouraging everyone listening to continue to submit their questions. In the meantime, we will ask one that was pre-submitted from Richmond, Virginia. How can the threats from extreme heat be addressed with the PROTECT funding?
So I can just give a couple of examples. One, we've talked a little bit about wildfires today. We know that extreme heat can bring along not just extreme heat, but also other, other effects such as wildfires. And so one type of project might be sort of a debris, wildfire debris planning, and how to address those sorts of events. Some of it may be the actual mix of the materials you use to build your roadway, upgrading the pavement mix to a mix that's more tolerant of higher temperatures, and the costs involved in upgrading that mix could be eligible for PROTECT. Those are a couple examples, but please in no way that should limit your creativity in thinking about how to address extreme heat. We know heat islands may have specific impacts in urban areas that you may want to address and how they impact the infrastructure in your area. But those are just a few examples that I came off the top of my head anyway.
Thank you. So it looks like it's our last question. Janice, do you have anything else you want to add?
Just to follow on Gary's message, the only thing I would say is the public health relationship to the infrastructure readiness is one that offers an additional opportunity to couple up benefits and to think about cascading benefits as much as cascading consequences. So when we start thinking about things like extreme heat, I think it's quite important for us to understand the different populations who are using public infrastructure, public transit, for example, and to think about things like, bus transit stations and their design, or what it means to prepare cool corridors that complement what's happening with roadway infrastructure. There are ways for us to look at health improvements as a co-benefit, and just want to make sure that we encourage that joint conversation in addition to the core PROTECT questions. But thank you, Michelle. That's it out for me.
I'd just like to respond because I think those are great comments, and our notice of funding opportunity does allow for applicants to tell some of those co-benefit stories. We have criteria around climate and sustainability and reducing greenhouse gases, as well as equity and getting more equitable outcomes. So great points, and definitely think about those stories as you work on your applications.
Thank you, Janice. And thank you so much, Gary. Really appreciate you taking part in this hub session today. Thank you to all of our mayors. So now we're going to turn to our usual Zoom poll before we end today's session. Hope you'll respond, take a minute to fill it out. It really does help us improve our content and the kinds of resources that we create. And while you're filling out the poll, there's just a couple of announcements. Next Wednesday, June 28th at 2 p.m., we'll have another local infrastructure hub that will be about tech and innovation, spotlighting the SMART grant winners that are modernizing urban freight management. This will be about how cities can deal with the influx of delivery trucks on their roads to improve safety, manage congestion, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. A link to register is on our website, and I think we're going to be popping it in the chat. We're also going to reconvene on Tuesday, July 11th, for a really important session, 2 p.m., on reconnecting communities for economic mobility and access to opportunities. So this is another important topic about how to use these resources to address the variety of community needs. So with that, we will wrap it up and want to thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thanks so much.